Hello, happy Friday. Hopefully my internet connection's a little better now. Virgin Media here in the UK is not the most reliable. But welcome. I am going to do the clue review that I've been such a loser and procrastinating on doing from last Thursday's mystery grape, which was Tempranillo from Rioja. Much easier one than the one I gave you guys yesterday. Yesterday was a tough one, but it's one that does feature on exams. So I needed to feature it after doing mystery grape. These things are over a year. But that was, I'll give you the answer since the game's pretty much up, is Cortese from Piedmont. And next Tuesday, I will give you a little bit of an idea behind that clue. Thankfully, with those neutral Italian whites, rarely do you get them kind of the mixed bag or you might get Suave in the mixed bag. But for the most part, with those neutral Italian whites, you tend to get them in the country flight or the regional flight, which kind of helps you get to the region, like Piedmont. You'll have a Barolo that says, yes, this is Barolo. What whites are there? And then you kind of just decide in between like Cortese and Arneas. So it is easier a little bit in blind tasting when you have the context there versus me just giving you the dry notes. But that's Tuesday's one. Let's get back to Tempranillo with Rioja, which is much more distinctive. It is a really good one to practice with blind tastings because you can get that in the mixed bag. You can certainly get that in the regional and in the country flight. And in my opinion, Rioja is freaking delicious, so it's worth practicing on. So let's get into those clues there. So clue number 1, ripe red cherry. Clue 2, dried strawberry. So we have red fruit. So with red fruit, you're kind of thinking cool climate, but the dried fruit there, I could have done dried cherries, dried plums, but I went with dried strawberries because that's a note that often popped up for me. So you're thinking a little bit of warmth there whenever you have a dried fruit component. Also sour Asian plums, kind of red plum, could also be a little bit black plum. I like the sour component on there because this is something that I picked up from Guildsom many years ago that really resonated, is that sweet and sour aspect with Tempranillo, particularly Rioja, like Wasson sauce, that you think of some of those Asian sauces, sweet and sour. There is some resonance there on that. So I really, that sour Asian plum jumped out. Vanilla bean was clue number 4. Clue 5, cured tobacco. The picture I picked also looked a little bit like leather, and so some people interpret that clue as leather, which honestly would work well. Here I was trying to introduce some of the oak aspects of it. You had, some oxidized notes, that dried strawberry. You've got vanilla. They often don't use necessarily new oak, but some of the vanillas can come out with some producers. And then the cured tobacco spice, a little bit of tertiary notes from the long aging. And then clue 6, this is the one that threw a lot of people off with the Tempranillo Rioja, dill on that. Dill is usually kind of a tell for American oak. Coconut can also be another one. I often, for myself, find that coconut suntan kind of comes out more in American oak aged wines from New World regions. You think like, actually a classic example, J-Lore. They're 7 Oaks, their red label one, around like $15 in the US from Paso. That one can have a little bit of that suntan coconut aspects of it. Some Australians, classic Barossa Shirazes. Those can definitely have some American oak. Penfolds was always a big user of that. That's kind of more that aspect of the American oak. And Rioja, of course, there's producers that use French oak or Hungarian oak or Slovenian oak. The only requirement in Rioja, it has to be the size of the barrel. It has to be that 225-liter barriques, but it can be any type of oak province. There is that tradition of American oak there that you see in some really good classic benchmark salad producers. Lopez Heredia, La Rioja Alta, Cune, Muga does kind of a mix like French and American, but you kind of just want to look at the producers and look at the tech note, because you tend to see when you look at past exam wines, especially for the WSET diploma, the examiners often like to feature the examples of Rioja that have more American oak influence because it's more distinctive. And so you do want to get good at looking at the clues of American oak versus French oak that you see in the glass. And for me, with Rioja, I think dill is one of the big ones. But dill is something that confuses people in that you might have the same experience that I had. When you think dill, you think pickles. As a kid, I hated pickles So dill was a negative association, so I never wanted to try anything else with dill because I just assumed it was going to smell or taste like pickles. Fresh dill does not smell or taste like pickles at all. So if you haven't recently went to the grocery store, go to your farmer's market, get some fresh dill to smell. There's a floral aspect of it. You can try it also with dried dill. Actually I have some dried dill with me right now. For me, dried dill kind of smells a little bit like weed with that. I used to live in Washington State, been many times in Oregon. The weed smell, that's what this kind of dried dill smells out. So there's a little bit of a floral herbal element to it, but I would recommend still getting fresh dill for when you're doing a practice. Get a Rioja that has a significant amount of American oak, get some dill, and do that side by side. It will really change your tasting approach, and you'll be able to pick up that note much easier. So those are the kind of the aroma and structure clues. So red fruit, and you might think, when you think Spain, you might expect more dark fruit. Spain is often considered the warm climate. Rioja is kind of more moderate continental because where it's located, it's got influences, particularly in the subzones of Alavesa and Rioja Alta, more Atlantic influence there towards the west. When you're going further east towards Rioja Oriental, you're getting more of that Mediterranean influence. That's often where you find more Garnacha planted. Tempranillo, those producers often try to go with the Alavesa and the Rioja Alta. And the big tradition that you'll find in Rioja is blending. Not just blending Tempranillo with Garnacha or Graciano or Mazuelo. They like blending between the different subzones. So they might have some vineyards that they have and own or source from in Rioja Alta, get a little bit of that, get a little bit of Alavesa, maybe a little bit from Oriental to give a little bit of oomph and body. But often they will lean towards Tempranillo's strengths of more red fruit from those cooler climates on that. Tempranillo is kind of an early to mid-ripening grape, so it does need a little bit of warmth, but not too much warmth. So it's kind of like the Goldilocks aspects of it. Now let's look at some of the structure clues. So medium ruby to medium garnet. Tempranillo is not a super pigmented, thick-skinned grape. It's not as pale as Pinot Noir, but sometimes in the glass I'll find it and kind of almost think vaguely Pinot. It's usually more that mid-ruby versus pale. And then with those long aging, when you get like a Grand Reserva, you get more of the oxidation. It definitely can go towards garnet. The intensity is more medium to medium plus because you've got some multiple clusters there. You've certainly got some primary fruit. You've got some oak notes, secondary notes. You've got some tertiary notes. It could get pronounced. You certainly can get like an outstanding example with pronounced. But in general, kind of more that mid to mid plus. You'll kind of notice a theme here as I break down these clues. Acidity, mid to mid plus acidity. Tannins, mid to mid plus tannins, and particularly chalky tannins. Nick Jackson, Master of Wine, his book Beyond Flavor, which I've raved about in many of these videos before, he describes it kind of that chalkiness on your tongue, similar to Syrah. They kind of have that same note. That was a really big eye-opener for me because you do feel it, those tannins, those chalkiness on your tongue. The flavors taste different than Syrah, so it kind of helps you distinguish between the two, but focus on your tongue with those. Compared to like Bordeaux varieties, Cabernet, Merlot, more on your gums. Body, medium to medium plus. So this is a trend, the pattern. Medium, medium plus. Medium, it's not Goldilocks. When you think of Tempranillo, think Goldilocks. It needs that Goldilocks climate. It's kind of like in that Goldilocks just in the middle aspect of it with everything. It's neither two extremes. It's not low, it's not really high, it's just kind of right there, just right in the middle. Alcohol, medium. For the most part, it can get up to high because everything with climate change can get up to high, get over 14%. So you just got to be mindful of that. So takeaways, when you think about Tempranillo and Rioja, think about the oak, tradition of aging, and think about tradition of blending. Those are probably the two biggest takeaways I'd like you to have from it. And speaking of oak, we just posted on the Elevage Wine Coaching site 2 webinars for the month of July on that. We are going to do a webinar on oak, pretty much American oak, Hungarian oak, French oak, using oak chips versus oak barrels, different size of the barrel. Also give you some details about which producers tend to do, American oak, which producers tend to do Hungarian oak. Give you some good examples with that. But basically, we're just going to go into what you should know as a wine student about oak and what can make it a little bit more dangerous on your exams, and well as we'll go back to some of these blind tasting clues. Because for a lot of our webinars, we can give you the theory, but if you don't tie the theory into your blind tasting with what's in the glass, it's only going to help you to a limited extent. And then the other webinar that we're going to do later this month is I'm going to do a little recap of some of those big things I learned from my recent trip to the Rhone. You saw in Instagram stories, I did a video posted up here on the Elevage account for my trip there a couple weeks ago. And it was very, very eye-opening. I read so much about the Rhone and all the different wine books over here and all the textbooks, but being there and particularly some of the great insights got from the producer visits, this trip was organized by Matt Walls of Decanter, who wrote a fabulous book on the Rhone. You learn so much more beyond what's in your textbook. So I want to share a lot of those big eye-opening insights about the Rhone Valley that, you often just don't come across. So those are on the sites, elevagewinecoaching.com. Those that are members, Elevage Wine Coaching members, can attend all these webinars for free. For everybody else, they're $10, and you get the slides and get the recording and all that fun stuff. So with that, enjoy your weekend, and I will see you guys on Tuesday. Have a good one.